Hey everybody, welcome. My name is Matthew. Thank you very much for joining. Today we're going to start a little series on the United States national debt. The debt is more or less always in the news cycle. Every session of Congress, they extend and heighten the ceiling of the national debt, except of course for the last time under Biden, we've just suspended that for the time being after all the COVID mess. But that's not a partisan statement to say that. Whether it's Republican or Democrat, the debt ceiling is always raised. What I want to try to do with this video is just to, as usual, show you the macros, show you the big picture, show you how the figures actually look, how they react to one another, but strictly in the context of the debt. Okay, so we're going to look at the debt. We're going to look at the increase in the debt each year. We're going to look at taxes that are raised to help pay down the debt. We're going to look at the interest payments, and we're also going to look at the money that is printed by the Federal Reserve, the Central Bank of the United States, to help ease that debt burden. All of those things, that orbit of tools that the federal government has to manage the national debt, especially in the modern era. We're going to look at that during this series. And as usual, with these videos, you know that I'm classically liberally oriented. I don't necessarily think that too much debt is a good thing, but you know, I'm just a humble taxpayer. I can't influence that one way or the other. The point is not to moralize too much on this. It's just to show you what has actually happened, and then if that can help you prepare yourself, your family, for the future. Never financial advice, as always. So let's just go ahead and get right into it. Let's look at what we have here. We have over a 200-year chart, 230-year chart of the national debt of the United States, starting from the ratification of the Constitution in 1789 all the way until April 2024, last monthly close. Got a lot of indicators on the chart here. Let's take them all off for this first video, and let's just look at the debt itself. All right, let's zoom into the early days of the Republic of the United States. This isn't a full history lesson, but as I've always said, there's nothing more American than getting help from your friends to fight a revolution. And from 1776, when the Declaration was made, until the early 1780s, the Revolutionary War itself, there was no bigger help to the United States than the French. Yorktown, the last battle, 1781, there were more French ships, soldiers, artillery, ammunition, loss of life than American. So something to keep in mind when you think about how wars are or could be fought today, and friends versus foes, people that love liberty versus people that hate liberty. And I'm not using that phrase lightly. Nonetheless, I digress. The United States, when all was said and done in the early 1790s, had about $70 million worth of debt. It's a small number compared to today. We'll get to all that. $70 million worth of debt owed primarily to monopolistic state entities that was France, Spain, and Holland, primarily. Okay. So they went along here. In the new republic, completely different structure of the federal government than today. I take all of that, I grant all that. Again, not a huge history lesson. They also had the first bank of the United States, which was a central bank-like entity that existed here, but that charter was not extended after the first 20 years, and a lot of debt was paid down. All right, we went from about $70 million in debt to 50, and then the War of 1812. Expansionary wars, the United States has again happened. Debt increased. Okay, and notice you don't need a central bank for the debt to increase. So the central bank was not here. This is actually the second bank in North America. There was the Bank of North America, which is before founding. That was colonial times. So this is actually the second bank in North America. If I want to talk roughly about the history of banking, but regardless, that was over. Now we have more wars, and typically, just to show you, this is the point of showing you this detail, we have the debt increases during war. Okay, so the government borrows against itself, borrows more than it can earn in taxing, spends more than it can earn in taxing, and we have more debt. All right. Then the debt was actually paid down pretty quickly. We have Andrew Jackson here being president, was not a fan of debt at all. also ended the Second Bank of the United States' charter, all right, which did start here in 1816, I should say. So it was already after the increase of debt had happened. The debt was paid down. No debt. Only time, actually, in the history of the United States, we had no debt. In 1835, 1836, the Second Bank of the United States was shuttered, which was actually the third bank of North America. No debt here. Now, that is a great thing for fiscal policies of the United States. However, if you were a Native American and you asked them how they felt about Andrew Jackson, they would not speak so positively. So again, nothing's black and white here. The South was a nation of slaves. I should say an economy of slaves here, 3/5 of a man clause, all sorts of things that weren't great for pure liberty and freedom. But this is the story of the debt. It was actually paid off after the Second Bank of the United States closed. All right, now we go up in antebellum United States, getting towards the Civil War. Okay, so different scale here than what I just had. Debt is slowly increasing again with no central bank, debt increasing a little bit, and then the Civil War. Okay, again, not a history lesson, but the Civil War was a result of two things, basically. It was the Northern view that slavery should be abolished, and it was the Southern view that the North should stay out of their economy, and it was a battle of states' rights as far as the Southern view. Okay, so there were two conflicting crosswinds here. Freedom versus all men in the Union. Not women, by the way, I should say. They didn't have the right to vote yet. Versus states' rights from the point of view of the South. Okay, and again, I'm not moralizing one way or the other. Slavery is absolutely wrong, and it was a very good thing that slavery was abolished. It was a bad thing that 3 million Americans had to die because of that, but that's what happened. To show you what happens again during war, what happened to the debt here. All right, we went from, again, about the same levels that we were at the founding here on the eve of the Civil War, about $70-80 million in debt, to $2.5 billion of debt. Huge increase by the time the Civil War was over. All right. Also during this time, Lincoln, to raise funds for this, started a national income tax. That was the only time this occurred. It stopped after the Civil War, but that was the only time this occurred until 1913. Something to keep in mind. Here's the beginning of the what they call the classical gold standard, which is really a very short period in history, is where all the central banks and governments around the world revolved around gold, not silver. Asian nations, China, started to get off of silver. The United States, by the way, was on a silver standard all the way up in this period, a silver standard. They went to a gold standard here, and unfortunately a bimetallic standard, which was silver and gold locked together, which caused inefficiencies in the market. Story for another time. But with the Coinage Act of 1873, they started the gold standard. But look, the debt is getting paid down. People sort of normally seeing that we should pay down national debt's not a great thing. Income taxes are raised. Taxes are raised. I shouldn't say income taxes. That was only here during the Civil War. One thing, now keep in mind, we still didn't have a central bank in the United States, but one thing that happened that was kind of a central banking-like idea was what was called the National Banking Act, and that happened after the Civil War. And Lincoln basically required, certainly after the Civil War ended as well, is that all reserves that banks held in excess of gold, this is commercial banks, if they had reserve assets, those had to be central government bonds, federal government bonds, national government bonds. So this is what the National Banking Act did. And so if you had reserves that were in excess of gold in your bank, in your commercial bank, you had to hold United States government bonds. Very bad policy, actually. Not a free policy. You'll see, again, I shouldn't get too much into the history in this video, but you're going to see other nations around the world did not have that policy. Canada, for example, just north of the border, they had a much more efficient money supply, efficient banking system. The United States did not have that happen. Regardless, you had some central banking-like activities here, but you did have the debt being paid down. What else happened during this period? Quite amazingly, during this period, basically, we'll zoom out a little bit more, but from the end of the Civil War all the way up pretty much to World War I, you had the highest rate of growth for an economy in the history of the world happening right here in the United States. I'm not showing it, it's not on the chart, But massive industrialization. This was the Industrial Revolution. First, it started in Britain, all right, the end of 1700s, early 1800s, made its way to the United States in full. Slavery was abolished. Very good thing. Industrialization, the North was taking over in the United States, but because the South was a very, very slave-driven economy before the Civil War. Regardless, massive industrialization all across the United States. Highest rate of growth in the history of the world at this point. And what happened to the national debt? Taking a moment to remind you that this show is brought to you by Trezor, home of the original Bitcoin hardware wallet. For over 10 years now, Trezor means business in Bitcoin security and functionality. When using their wallet software Trezor Suite to connect to the Bitcoin network, you're automatically connected via Tor, protecting your identity and giving you full control of your coins in a fully open source manner, both on the software level and on the hardware level. So head on over to Trezor.io to grab your Trezor Safe 3 with a secure element, Model T with a touchscreen, or the original Trezor 1, as well as a ton of available accessories to back up your keys and keep your coins safe. This show is proud to be associated with Trezor. It's going down. It's going down. It does change a little bit here, and we had some currency crises and other things we're not going to talk about. This is the bimetallic period. Gold and silver are national tender. Not a good thing to link those two by fiat, by force. But national debt was going down. All right. Now we see it go up again in the late 1800s, and we get to World War I. Let's go from World War I to, let's say, let's go all the way to the eve of World War II. What happens here? All right, we see from basically a flat or down debt from after the Civil War to $3 billion of debt all the way till World War I, when the United States enters the war, skyrockets. All right, we take it up an order of magnitude from 3 to 30, roughly, a little bit less than $30 billion in debt. Okay. Also during this period, which I actually don't have on the timeline, but many wild things happened here, okay, in 1913. Firstly, which most casual observers and people interested in Bitcoin know by now, the Federal Reserve was founded. Okay, Central Bank of the United States was founded in 1913, opened its doors in 1914. What else happened in 1913? The income tax was approved, passed by Congress. The income tax. Third thing that happened in 1913, which was really hindered states' rights at a national level, was the senators of the United States Congress. Still 100 senators back in the day. I shouldn't say that because actually the states were still being added at that point. I don't know the exact number of senators actually, but there were 2 senators per state. And what happened during this period in 1913 as well? Basically, the federal Congress got it through that senators are not going to be elected by the states, by the state legislatures as they were in the past, but they're going to be elected by the populace, which is actually how the House of Representatives work. So you kind of do this weird redundancy where the House of Representatives was supposed to be for the people, districts and drawing, population percentages, all that stuff, which by the way is way out of whack today compared to early days. But regardless, the districts of the federal government, that was supposed to be the House of Representatives. That's for the people, the people's vote. They vote in their representatives, so on and so forth. It's called the House of Representatives. The Senate was supposed to be a national representation of states voted on by a state legislature. So Ohio would vote in their 2 senators. New York would vote in their 2 senators. But the New York state legislature would vote them in before 1913. After 1913, became part of the popular vote. All right, so you might think that's a good thing, but actually what it did was it took a little bit more power away from the states to the federal government. So again, you know I'm a Bitcoin fan. You know I'm a fan of decentralization. The United States got a lot more centralized in 1913. Okay, the debt increased a lot. All right, I'm needing to stop myself from too much of the history lesson, but look, even with the central bank, we tried to pay it down. We had what was called the Roaring Twenties, which ended in disaster, the Great Depression, worst depression in the United States history. debt goes up again. Okay, so wars, depression, government spending more than you can receive in taxes. That's when the debt goes up. We see it go up here. Gold Reserve Act. All right, what is this? This is where FDR actually confiscates the gold of the people, tells them to turn it into the Federal Reserve. He also devalues gold basically overnight after this. And the debt is still going up, okay? The depression is not ending. It's not helping it, but it's rough days for the U.S. And the depression really didn't end until World War II, okay? So here we have the Gold Reserve Act, different scale now. We're at that $25 billion in debt, paid it down a little bit after World War I in the roaring 20s, but we're going back up again after the Depression, going up now World War II. World War II starts, of course, September 1939. Russia and Soviet Bolshevist Russia and Hitler's Nazi Germany, two evil, foul regimes, both evilly and foul, invade Poland. Really ramped up the debt here in a big way during World War II. United States entered, of course, later after Pearl Harbor, and really ramped up in the East, but also in Europe. Didn't end until the war ended in April 1945. Okay, it's about the time actually the debt stops increasing massively. The European theater, I should say, didn't end until there. It ended a little bit later in Japan. But look, we can see massive increase here as well during wars. Okay, so the debt was $45 billion, goes up to $260 billion during World War II. All right, let's zoom out again and then back in. We have here the Bretton Woods Conference. This establishes the dollar because a lot of gold flowed into the United States because people were trying to get away from Hitler and Stalin, from the free world. Polish gold, Norwegian gold, Dutch gold, British gold all flowed into the United States and Canada. But the United States became this is really when the dollar became the world's reserve currency at the Bretton Woods Conference, which was the last year of World War II, just kicking off the last year, basically. Then we got more war. We have Vietnam. Now, not a huge increase in debt immediately in Vietnam. Vietnam was a long battle, okay, a 20-year battle. I'm showing you here Vietnam War begins 1955. It ends 1975. The debt during the entire period here doubled, but it took a long time, okay, to go to from 275 billion in debt to 530 billion in debt. At that same period, look, we have what was called the Bretton Woods system, which is basically the dollar is what central banks reserve. The United States will reserve the gold. People like Charles de Gaulle, a hero to many, said, enough with this, let's get our gold back. And he started calling gold back from the United States here. Richard Nixon said, no, we're not going to do this. Suspended the gold window temporarily, basically ended the gold standard for all time. And then from this point, from August 1971, the world was on a complete fiat standard. Okay, so anyway, any sort of semblance of hard money was over. Regardless, still, whether it's a fast increase in debt or a slower increase in debt, we can see that debt increases during wars. Let's reset the zoom again. Let's go from where the Vietnam War ends now up to, say, the global financial crisis. Now, the Smithsonian Agreement, this is actually when the official gold standard ended. This sort of fake rate of, it increased a little bit from $35 an ounce, went up over $40 an ounce, and I think it did even one more increase before it was suspended. The United States actually still measures gold officially on its books and the Federal Reserve's books at that 40 and some change dollars an ounce. Regardless, nobody else in the world does, and as of this recording, gold is screaming over $2,400 an ounce, so it tells you something. We start, actually, interestingly here, with some hiccups in the 70s, stagflation, but what we start here is known as the period of great moderation, where it's just a gradual increase of debt, but, you know, in the United States at least, the Vietnam War was over, thank goodness. There were still other wars around the world. The Soviets were invading Afghanistan. You know, world was moving on, but the United States, it's sort of, everybody had thought that the Federal Reserve had figured it out, the Treasury had figured it out, that we can just increase debt sort of slowly, also pay down some taxes, pay down some interest with taxes every year, but we can increase debt and things are generally okay. And even in the 90s, we sort of tried to counter that, and you see this sort of cresting of the debt right here. This is Bill Clinton supposedly balancing the budget for a couple of years, and he did. I'll show you this in a future video, but there's a lot of news about this balancing the budget as it's sort of some amazing thing, but this is what a balanced budget actually looks like. It just means a stopping of an increase in the debt. It happened for just a couple years, around 2000. Bush comes in, 9/11, Iraq War, debt goes up again at an even faster clip. Global financial crisis, debt goes up again at an even faster clip. COVID's not on the map, but on the timeline here, but we can see debt goes up again from March 2020 at an even faster clip all the way till today, April 2024. $34,616 billion in debt. What is 1,000 billion? A trillion. So we have $34.6 trillion in debt, $34,000 billion in debt, whereas way back here in the beginning, 1789, we had $70 million in debt. That's all I want to show you for this first intro video. I know I've discussed the debt before many times, but basically it's going to increase during war. Okay, it doesn't have to be money printing that increases it. It's just the United States borrowing more than it can take in taxes, spending more than it can take into taxes, borrowing the difference. It's going to increase during war. It's also going to increase during periods of financial crisis, such as the Great Depression and war again. All right, and the global financial crisis as well, COVID as well. That's the lesson from this video. Tune in for the next one for more. Thank you very much. Let me know what you think in the comments.